Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much to BITC for inviting me here today. We're really going to talk a bit about the Olympics, of course, today, but in the context of sustainable cities and what that might mean for us over the next few years. I've got my pictures down there, great. And I think transformation has been one of the key themes for the last couple of days, and there's another great transformation that's happening. We are urbanizing as a planet, and as we do that, can we use that process of urbanization to help create truly sustainable cities and truly sustainable ways of living into the future? I think that's one of the ways we can frame the challenge in the coming years. And we are in the middle of a great urbanization. Already over 50% of the world's population live in cities, but that's going to rise to over 70% in the next decades. And for instance, if you take countries like China, 10,000 new cities are going to be built there. There are 350 million people who are going to move into the cities in the next 30 to 40 years. So massive changes, not just in this country, but in other countries. And of course, great opportunities for us to look at how we can support that process and make sure it's as sustainable as possible. And arguably, the battle for sustainability will be won or lost in the way we develop our cities into the future, both how we transform and remodel our existing cities and also create new cities that support truly sustainable ways of living. The environmental context is one which I think you've had an opportunity over the last couple of days to explore a bit more. Tony Juniper was talking about how we're exceeding the environmental limits of the planet. We use ecological footprinting, and this methodology suggests that we're now consuming probably 30, maybe 50% more each year of renewable resources than the planet can sustain into the long term. Some people say we're living off the capital of our planet rather than just living off the interest as a financial analogy, which will get us into trouble in a few years' time. But equity is also going to be a key issue as we move forward. We need to look at a much more equitable distribution of resources between currently rich countries and currently poor countries. And in terms of ecological footprint, we can get a concept of a fair share of the Earth's resources by taking the 11.2 billion hectares of productive land and sea on the planet. That's what we've got in terms of the productive land and sea on the planet from which we need to meet our needs. If we divide it by a population of 7 billion, we have about 1.7 hectares of productive land and sea from which to meet our needs if we're living sustainably. And different countries in the world are consuming at very different rates. So we have an ecological footprint of around about 6 hectares in the UK, somewhere between 5 and 6 hectares. Other countries like the States have an ecological footprint closer to 10 hectares per person. But what that does mean, for example, is that if everyone on Earth had lifestyles such as lifestyles we have in Europe and the UK, we would need 3 planets to support us. So we talk about having 3 planet lifestyles in the UK. And our challenge into the future is to create cities, for example, where we can lead happy and healthy lives, but within a fair share of the Earth's resources, what we have been calling one planet living. Now, cities, there's a lot of data now emerging around the world of the ecological footprint of different cities, and here's an example of some of these. And what's clear from this data is that the way we design cities and the lifestyles they support is a key determinant of the ecological footprint and the environmental impact. So we have cities with relatively low impacts and cities with high impacts, and we see generally this trend that cities with high impacts are those which are very car dependent, for example. So cities like Houston there have some of the highest footprints in the world. So how we shape our cities, our access to public transport, for example, where our homes are located in comparison to our workplaces, our leisure spaces, all those determine the lifestyles and ultimately the impact that we will have. Coming back to London, my organisation BioRegional with the London Sustainable Development Commission started modelling the carbon footprint of London and seeing what we might do to hit some of the targets which are set, for example, in the Climate Change Act to reduce our carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. And the interesting thing was prior to this study, London was really looking at what we call our direct, what are known sometimes as the direct emissions of carbon dioxide. Under UN protocols, it's called Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. But basically, that's the fossil fuels we burn in the city through, say, petrol and diesel, and also the electricity that we use. We can trace that back and have the carbon footprint of that. But in fact, if we look at all the manufactured goods that we import into London, if we look at all the food that we import and we start adding in all those associated carbon emissions, we get what's known as a total footprint or a consumption-based footprint. And that's almost double our direct emissions. And really, when we're thinking about sustainability, we have to think about the total impacts that we have. So it's not just the carbon dioxide that we release in our cities, but also the carbon dioxide that might appear, for example, on China's emissions figures. But we've imported those manufactured goods into the UK. And we spent a bit of time modelling, looking at how we could increase efficiencies, what the scope is for renewable energy, public transport in various different aspects of our lives. And we can get down to the target of an 80% reduction by 2050, but we have to do absolutely everything. I think that's the key lesson we learned from that. And we modelled it in different areas of our lives, such as household energy, consumer goods. So we can take different aspects of our lives and look at how we can change towards the sort of lifestyles that we need into the future. But as well as looking at sort of projecting forward and looking at how we can change our lifestyles currently, we can also almost start looking at a blank sheet of paper and saying, well, if we were to start again, particularly with, say, new cities, how can we create cities which incorporate some of the ideas which I think you've been introduced to over the last couple of days, like the cradle-to-cradle idea, a circular metabolism, and there is work being done all around the world on how we can do that, and some very interesting first projects being developed around that, and we can bring that to the UK, not just for expansion of our cities in the UK or creating new communities like the eco-towns, but also to help remodel our existing cities. And there are good examples here in London. BedZ is one example. You're welcome to come and visit us down in London Borough of Sutton. But for example, just through good design and use of energy-efficient appliances, we've halved the electricity consumption compared to the London average. We've reduced private car use compared to the surrounding area by 65% by making a car club available and reducing the amount of private car parking. And now, in fact, you know, I carry around my Oyster card, which not only lets me on buses and tubes and trains, but also lets me in and out of the car club car. So now I have a total mobility card. And these are the sorts of solutions which we can expand to help people live more sustainable lifestyles. And all around the world, there are examples we can find, from remodeling existing cities, particularly, say, the Scandinavian cities, Stockholm, Malmo, Freiburg in Germany, and also totally new concepts like Masdar City in Abu Dhabi, a zero-carbon, zero-waste city where the first buildings have been completed. We were very pleased that the One Planet Living concept was selected to create the sustainability strategy for our London 2012 bid, and we worked with partners to create this strategy. And that helped us win the Olympics for London, and we're very pleased that that has been seen through in all sorts of ways into delivery on the ground through the ODA and LOCOG. Now, it hasn't gone as far as we want, but it will certainly be pioneering in very many ways, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our next speakers on how that is translating into the practice. But ultimately, in terms of sustainability for the Games, I think it is the legacy which will really determine what we think long-term about the impact of the Games. And we talk a lot about competition, but in fact, competition comes from the Latin competere, which doesn't mean competition in the usual sense we use it. It actually means to strive together. And I think the Olympics has been a great opportunity to show how we can strive together, and this needs to continue on into the legacy. So thank you very much.
Thank you for setting the scene. Thank you very much.